In an isolated Arctic region some 200 miles east of Anchorage, Alaska, there stands a phased array transmitter capable of beaming more than 3 billion watts of energy into the ionosphere. It is referred to as the High Frequency Auroral Research Program, or HARP for short. Unfortunately, no one seems to know precisely what it does, or more importantly, what it can do. Could it be that this marvel of technology is capable of changing and controlling weather patterns worldwide? Is HARP, in fact, a part of some secret Star Wars defense system? Or is it, as one of its originators suggests, just one big toy? What, in fact, has it done to get so much attention? Is it possible that this huge electronic device, as some suggest, is actually a mechanism for conducting mind control experiments over whole populations? HARP is still under construction. Could it be that military planners see the finished product as the ultimate death ray? Is it just a coincidence that the hole in the ozone layer is expanding in the very region of the atmosphere irradiated by HARP? Some critics have suggested that the state of Alaska is host to the world's largest and most sophisticated technological doomsday device. What is really going on in the frozen landscape at the edge of the Arctic? We'll try to uncover the mystery of HARP. Near the isolated Arctic village of Gakona, Alaska, stands an impressive array of high-power radio antennas. Officially, it is the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. But to just about anyone who knows of its existence, it is simply HARP. So far, the U.S. government, some private industry, and various academics have spent over $30 million on what is listed as an experiment. But an experiment in what? What exactly is HARP? In 1980, a plasma physicist by the name of Bernard Eastlund applied for a patent on a device he described as being a method and apparatus for altering a region in the Earth's atmosphere, ionosphere, and/or magnetosphere. For most people, altering a region in the Earth's atmosphere or ionosphere is just scientific gobbledygook. A typical response is, who cares? But when you think about it, the Earth's ionosphere is precisely where the Earth's weather is formed, and the weather affects everybody on the planet. Dr. Eastlund's patent became the blueprint for what is now called HARP, a method and device that some believe is now capable of altering life on this planet as we know it. But who or what is behind this project?
ARCO originally approached me in 1984 to find a use for the natural gas on the North Slope of Alaska, which they could not sell. To give you a feel for how much gas they asked me to find an application for, it was enough gas to produce all the electricity in the United States for a full year. I originated some ideas for military applications and beneficial civilian applications in which that gas would be converted into electricity and then used to power some gigantic antennas.
But power gigantic antennas to do what? What military applications were anticipated? And what are the beneficial civilian applications? Perhaps the question we should be asking is not what can it do, but what, if anything, has HARP actually done already?
What's most scary and exciting about HARP is the potential of its application. For example, ELF waves generated by the array could be used for a variety of military applications, including finding underground bases, tunnels, even caves. The government is interested in HARP technology because it's a new frontier, a new way to solve an old problem. Ronald Reagan asked the scientists of America to find a way to render ICBMs, nuclear weapons, obsolete. HARP was one of many programs that were developed that might be able to do this. The U.S. is continuing to be interested in the project because this technology opens an incredible suite of potential weapons systems. These include talking with deeply submerged submarines, locating underground bases, tunnels, launch and manufacturing facilities for weapons of mass destruction. Strange, amazing things like being able to set off volcanoes or create earthquakes, being able to create relativistic particles at the top of the atmosphere that could destroy enemy spy satellites, that could take out space-based weapons platforms. While there is no official admission of using this technology, mainstream media has reported that HARP was used to find terrorists in Afghanistan. It's hard to imagine the U.S. passing up such an opportunity.
What does HARP do? HARP is a large antenna where we beam radio frequency energy up into the upper atmosphere, and we create on a small scale what the sun normally does. And the reason we're trying to do this is because when you have disturbances in the ionosphere, we can't communicate with our satellites.
Basically then, HARP is just a great big radio antenna with enough power to heat up the ionosphere and maintain radio communication with satellites, or find holes in the Earth. That sounds harmless enough, but critics suggest there are other, more sinister applications.
Applications discussed in the patents included destroying missiles. Communications control and disruption were included. There were some other ideas both to possibly modify weather and finally to lift a portion of the upper atmosphere further out into space where hopefully it would be able to deflect missile trajectories.
Dr. Eastland, we should point out, is no longer with the program, but his patent did in fact anticipate a Star Wars kind of defense mechanism which also had the capability of actually changing the weather, disrupting communications, and literally moving the upper atmosphere closer to the sun. But if the technology can do all of that, is it also likely to affect people, animals, even the Earth itself? Carl Sagan once wrote, "We've arranged a global civilization upon which most crucial elements profoundly depend on science and technology. We've also arranged things so that almost no one understands science or technology. Sooner or later, this combustible mixture of ignorance and power will blow up in our faces." Have we finally reached that point? Can anyone predict what altering or moving the upper atmosphere will do?
The first serious study of this type of technology possibly dates back to Nikola Tesla. His genius gave us many inventions, most importantly, alternating current, or AC, which is the foundation of our electrical civilization today. As far back as 1934, the New York Times read an article on what they described as Tesla's death ray. Tesla had been working on these kinds of inventions most of his life. In March of 1920, a publication called Electrical Experimenter published illustrations of Tesla's prototype wireless power transmitter, which even then was being described as a death ray searchlight device. Dr. Eastland even referenced Tesla in his initial patent, and in a BBC A&E documentary said, "I think Tesla would be very proud." In my view, HARP, based in part on Tesla technology, has the potential to be the ultimate doomsday device.
On the other hand, those who are directly involved with the project seem to think there's nothing at all to worry about.
HARP has no effect on the Earth.
Is HARP safe? Yes, HARP is safe.
Therein lies the controversy. Is it a doomsday device, or basically just an expensive toy? This argument has been going on for years. The mystery, however, remains unexplained. Is it possible that this innocent-looking array of antennas can generate enough power to disrupt the Earth's natural processes? Just exactly what are we playing with here?
The ionosphere of the Earth has got enormous amount of energy. There are 8,000 thunderstorms going on all over the Earth at any given moment. There are millions of amperes of electricity pouring to the Earth from lightning strikes. And HARP could create a trigger effect. It's the same as a bullet, for example. If you have the primer on the back of a bullet, and that primer releases a tiny amount of energy, but it triggers the larger power in the bullet itself. And HARP is playing with the energy system of the Earth.
In many ways, HARP is one of the most perplexing and contradictory mysteries we have yet had to face. College and university science departments are working with the project in an effort, apparently, to discover exactly what it might do to the Earth. Yet HARP officials tell us it has no effect on the Earth. How do they know? Dr. Eastland's patent date is 1987, yet the technology goes back at least to Nikola Tesla's experiments in 1920. Was Tesla building a death ray? And is it all just a coincidence that with the ionosphere and the ozone layer so interrelated, that the hole in the ozone layer appears to be expanding in the very region of the Earth's atmosphere irradiated by HARP? We often hear that the Earth's ecosystem is fragile, that a hole in the ozone layer could alter the ecological balance of the Earth and cause irreparable harm. What precisely does irradiating the ionosphere do to this delicate balance?
What I'm holding in my hands is an electrodeless lamp. In it I have a low atmosphere gas, somewhat similar to the atmosphere above the Earth. I'm going to turn it on in my microwave oven and demonstrate that the around 1 watt per square centimeter that this microwave oven makes will turn it on and generate a plasma. And you see all of the motion of the plasma. That's typical of what will happen at high altitude, where the ionosphere gets irradiated with these big beams.
More to the ozone hole than just automobile exhaust.
There are several high-powered radio antennas around the world, but in relation to HARP, they're like a child's cap gun compared to a 50-millimeter cannon. The HARP antenna farm currently consists of 48 towers, each about 25 meters tall, topped with crossbeams facing an east-west, north-south direction. The antenna array will eventually grow to 180 of these towers, all interconnected. That means HARP will have an effective radiated power of 3.6 billion watts, or 72,000 times more powerful than America's largest commercial radio station, and nearly 100 times the power of its Russian counterpart, known internationally as the Woodpecker. It also means it has that much more capacity to do both mental and physical damage to humans.
The scientists assure us that they know precisely what's going on in the ionosphere. But short of pumping that energy up there, do they have any way of knowing what might happen with even 3 million watts, let alone the focused energy of 3 billion watts of effective radiated power?
We have, I believe right now, 18 different colleges and universities that are working the program with us. University scientists are interested because they're studying science, and this is a major effect on the Earth, and so they want to know more about what it is and what it does.
What we can do with an antenna is change the portion of the sky into which we insert the energy. But because we're squeezing the megawatts into a narrow beam, then in a very tiny area, you can create what's it called, an effective gigawatt.
So there are some things we do know. What we don't know is why the government suddenly became interested in this strange technology.
HARP began with a congressional insertion in the appropriations bill of fiscal year 1990. In essence, Congress directed the Defense Department to explore the potential for using the auroral regions for improving communications and navigation and surveillance. From there, the assignment came that the Navy and the Air Force were to manage the program, and we were directed to do so.
In his autobiography, Tesla said the impulse that dominated him was to harness the energies of nature to the service of man. If this is what HARP is all about, it is a noble experiment indeed. But Dr. Eastland, who was a great admirer of Tesla, was removed from the project long before the Department of Defense took it over. Which leads us to ask, What is the impulse that dominates modern scientists and military planners? What does the Air Force and Navy believe HARP can ultimately contribute to their objective? And are there really any civilian objectives that can be met by HARP technologies? Dr. Eastland's patents, which were held by ARCO, now seem to be largely forgotten. Or are they?
When you look at the other patents built upon the work of Eastland, it becomes clear how the military intends to use a HARP transmitter. It could give them a tool to replace the electromagnetic pulse effect of some atmospheric thermonuclear devices still considered an option by some planners. It can replace the huge, extremely low-frequency submarine communication system. It could replace the over-the-horizon radar system once planned for the current location of HARP with a much more accurate system. It could provide a wide-area Earth-penetrating beam capable of detecting underground nuclear test sites. It could even provide a tool for geophysical probing that would define gas, mineral, and oil deposits over vast regions. And it could also be used to detect incoming low-level planes and cruise missiles.
All of that sounds reasonable, even desirable for those who are interested in a sound national defense and a more secure world. But since no one has ever built a radio transmitter this big before, some experts wonder if the side effects might not overcome the technological advantages.
In 1983, I did radio tomography with 30 watts, looking for oil in the ground. I found 26 oil wells over a 9-state area, and 100% of the time was accurate with just 30 watts of power beaming straight into solid rock. HARP, or the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, uses 2 billion watts beamed straight into the ionosphere for experiments. Now, that's profoundly dangerous. Picture these strings on the piano as layers of the Earth. In fact, picture each string as a molecular bond length. Each one has its own frequency. What we used to do is beam radio waves into the ground, and it would vibrate any strings that were present in the ground. For instance, we might get a sound back like, and we'd say, that's natural gas. We might get a sound back like, and we'd say that's crude oil. We were able to identify each frequency for each layer of Earth that was there. We accomplished this with just 30 watts of radio power. If you do this with 2 billion watts, the vibrations are so violent that the entire piano would shake. In fact, the whole house would shake. In fact, the vibrations could be so severe underground that could even cause an earthquake.
As you might expect, the United States is not the only country in the world researching this kind of technology. Our old nemesis, the Russians, for example, have their own version, and they've been at it longer. What happens if other nations begin conducting the same experiments?
Actually, the Soviets began a series of tests starting in 1976. These became known around the world as the Russian woodpecker because they were pulsed at 10 beats per second. In October of that year, a New York Times article pointed out that not only did the Russian signal disrupt radio and telecommunications worldwide, it posed a threat to human beings by affecting the central nervous system. In 1990, the EPA released a report that suggested a causal link between extremely low-frequency electromagnetic fields and leukemia, lymphoma, and brain cancer in humans. But in the entire 440-page HARP environmental impact statement, that fact is never mentioned. It's impossible to escape the idea that there might be a lot of other stuff they're not telling us.
You'd think that anything run by the government and invested with that much technology would be a closed book. Actually, just the opposite appears to be the case. The facility is maintained by a single caretaker whose primary job is to keep the snow off the antennas. It has its own website, and the facility is even open to the public on some occasions. Of course, not too many people venture up to Gakona, Alaska, even to see the aurora borealis. Could it be we are seeing the perfect example of something that is hidden in plain sight?
Of course, that's a major problem. No one is telling us anything except what it won't do, yet HARP could be not only the biggest ionospheric heater in the world, it could also be the largest device ever conceived to effectively brainwash entire regional populations. The HARP planners, of course, have never discussed any of this research, but both the Army and the Navy have been working on these concepts since the early 1960s.
HARP officials are equally defensive about any effects their toy has had or may have on the weather. In fact, Dennis Papadopoulos, referring to the suggestion that HARP might be the cause of some extreme weather events, said, "It's like trying to use a fly to stop a truck. I would need 1,000,000 HARPs and all the energy from the world's electricity for a year to affect a thunderstorm. It's a matter of energy levels." The official HARP website is more specific. It states flatly that the HARP facility will not affect the weather, and goes on to say, quote, "No association between natural ionospheric variability and surface weather has been found. However, there are those who take exception to that statement."
The statement that there is no association between the ionosphere and surface weather is an outright lie. In his book, The Weather Companion, Gary Lockhart wrote, "We can artificially influence the Earth's aurora with a relatively small amount of energy, and we know that outbursts of the northern lights do change weather patterns. There is indeed mounting evidence that upper atmospheric events affect lower atmospheric weather, and vice versa. But the evidence is not yet conclusive. As long as the subject remains controversial, HARP scientists feel safe in discounting it. They also apparently feel safe in lying about its existence.
What they're not paying any attention to is what's happening to the ionosphere while it's being held 80 miles out into space by this high energy beam. It's heating up. And all of the molecules in that ionosphere region are absorbing energy out of that radio beam. And if they pick the right frequency to push that plume out into space, that energy may discharge back out of the ionosphere, back down the radio beam, and strike the Earth. And it would be about 100 times the energy released out of a thunderbolt. And that's how much energy would be released.
In certain applications, the military acknowledges they can literally lift the ionosphere, and what they say is, there's no problem, it's a short period of time. But when you lift up the atmosphere, the lower atmosphere rushes in and fills that void, thus changing localized weather patterns. HARP research papers say they intend to lift a part of the ionosphere that creates a hole that they say heals over quickly. But what happens if you create enough holes that they just can't quite take care of it fast enough?
It's this question of holes that is particularly troubling. For a number of years now, a growing body of scientists and politicians have been warning of holes in the ozone layer. For the most part, the problem has been placed at the doorstep of fossil fuels and other fluorocarbon molecules, such as refrigerants. Could it be they are not the problem, or at least not the principal problem?
The reality is, the ionosphere stops the sun's most violent radiation by making ions. The stratosphere filters out most of the sun's weaker radiation, ultraviolet light, by making ozone. That's why a reduction in the ozone layer can pose a threat to life on this planet. And that's just one reason why HARP's deliberate meddling with the ionosphere is so frightening.
Is it just a coincidence that the largest known hole in the ozone layer is over the Arctic? Could it be that HARP research, with its disruption of the ionosphere, is accelerating or even causing the problem? We are already paying hundreds of millions of dollars in increased cost of goods and services brought on by the efforts to reduce or eliminate fluorocarbon output, ostensibly to protect the ozone layer. But the money may be the least of our problems. The fact is, life on this planet exists because the Earth's atmosphere has the ability to absorb ionizing radiation in the ionosphere and the stratosphere. Will the high-frequency auroral research project go too far in injecting energy into the ionosphere? And how far is too far?
The ionosphere is a dynamic system, ever-moving, ever-changing. I don't think anyone on this planet really knows when enough is enough.
Sometimes we work at solving a mystery just for the sheer fun of it. And most of the time, if you come up with the wrong answer, you can just go back and start over. Could it be that the wrong answer on this one will have us all playing a harp?